Greetings. Thanks to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we've provided in the chat and by visiting our website, a link to which will be added to the chat real soon now. I am your host today, Sarah Smith, and you can find more about me and the other sponsors and volunteers of Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the provided handout. Please note that that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. So you'll get a chance to be able to see again any of the readings that we're doing today.
Today we'll be featuring 6 authors: Loren Rhoads, Hadeer Elsbai, Kaaron Warren, Kristi McManus, Branwen Oshea, and Tori Eldridge. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. We apologize in advance that during this session of Strong Women, Strange Worlds, we experienced extreme technical difficulties, and the introduction to Loren Rhoads' reading was lost somewhere in the ether. However, all of the information is presented on her slide, if you will allow me to read that to you. Loren Rhoads' Alondra stories have appeared in the books Best New Horror No. 27, Strange California, Frightmare Women Write Horror, Sins of the Sirens, The Haunted Mansion Project Year 1, Unsafe Words, and earlier this year, Occult Detective. They're collected in Kindle format, starting with Alondra's Experiments, and you can find more about Loren Rhoads at lorenrhoads.com. We present Loren's reading as it begins.
Alondra hadn't left her cottage in the better part of 2 weeks. Pearl had tried a couple of times to lure her out to Mardi Gras parties, but Alondra wasn't a fan of parties at the best of times, and the chaos of Mardi Gras season seemed overwhelming. Besides, she preferred to do her drinking at home. That didn't mean that the celebrations didn't reach her. Even in the Garden District, there were parties, loud voices, shrill laughter, jazz quartets on the verandas. Alondra set her books aside when the noise became too much for her to concentrate and retreated into the kitchen. Her landlady had loaned her some family recipes that Alondra had dutifully copied over. She never tasted authentic jambalaya until Marie brought her a pot of it. Now she was struggling to recreate the experience. Marie's note to add 2 or 3 teaspoons of pepper sauce added mystery to the process. Alondra's first batch of jambalaya had been too hot to eat. Now, finally, she thought she was getting the hang of it. The evening was unseasonably warm for February, so Alondra had propped the front door open with her copy of de Griot's Witchcraft, Magic, and Alchemy to let some air in. She returned to the kitchen to check the rice. She was daydreaming over the pot and didn't notice as the temperature in her kitchen dropped. Something heavy clunked down on her kitchen table behind her. A chill wrapped the nape of her neck. Alondra turned with a dripping spoon held across her body like a weapon. At the table sat a white woman with her hair pulled up into a disheveled pile. Rather than a Mardi Gras mask, her face had been charcoaled with 2 black diamonds that stretched from hairline to jaw. She wore a spaghetti-strap harlequin dress that left her shoulders bare, but Alondra was certain that the chunky necklace she wore held real diamonds. On Alondra's table, she dropped a skull splashed with crimson paint. The chill emanated from the skull. "You need to help me." It wasn't a request. She needed to renew her protections around her cottage, Alandra thought, and probably give the table a salt wash. She wasn't inclined to be kind to strangers who marched into her home without so much as a bow your leave. Whose skull is it? Alandra asked. I don't know. I bought it in a box of vintage Mardi Gras decorations. When Alandra didn't respond, the woman continued in her rush. We just moved to New Orleans in December. Charles insisted that we go to his boss's Three Kings party, and then we had to eat that nasty almond cake, and he found a baby in his piece, and they said that meant we had to host the Mardi Gras party. The longer the woman talked, the lower the temperature dropped. White puffs of breath accompanied her words. Despite the warmth of the pot bubbling at her back, Alandra shivered. She interrupted the torrent of complaints. What would you like me to do? I've tried to get rid of it ever since we threw our party a week ago. In the middle of the evening, the house got so cold that the pipes started to burst. I put the skull in the garbage, but I found it in the breakfast nook the next day. I made Charles take the garbage out that morning, but it turned up under the bathroom sink. I ran it out when the garbage man came on Tuesday, but it was on my pillow that night when I came to bed. Since then, I've tried throwing it out of the car, mailing it away, and dumping it into the river. It keeps coming back. Alandra held up her hand to stem the flow of words. I want you to donate $1,000 to save our cemeteries. Then I want you to take a bath with the charm I give you. Wash your face, wash your hair, gather up all the Mardi Gras decorations you bought and took them to St. Vincent de Paul's. Oh, I've done that already, the woman assured. All right, wait here a moment. Alandra crossed through the bathroom into the bedroom of her cottage. She found a handkerchief and pulled down her jars of herbs, mixing lavender and rose with a chunk of dragon's blood and a piece of galangal. She wrapped the packet closed with a piece of yellow ribbon. Then she returned to the woman sitting in her kitchen and dropped the package into her hand. What do I owe you? Pay me what you think my help is worth. If this thing stops showing up at my house, that would be worth a lot. The woman took a roll of bills from her purse and set them on the table. But if it shows up tomorrow morning, Alandra smiled. I know you're not threatening me, she said. The woman swallowed audibly. You can go now. I'll handle things from here. As soon as the woman crossed her threshold, Alandra moved 4 pillar candles to surround the skull. She lit a stick of spaghetti from the stove and used it to light the candles and a disc of charcoal. Once the coal was smoldering nicely, she added 3 pearls of frankincense. As the smoke filled the kitchen, Alandra dished up a bowl of jambalaya for the skull and another for herself. The temperature in the kitchen had returned to normal by the time she sat down across from the skull. Outside the cottage, the sounds of Mardi Gras continued, but it was almost midnight. Once the streets had cleared, Alandra would ask Jackson, her landlady's husband, if he could give her a ride out to Holt Cemetery so she could give the poor skull a decent burial and some peace at last. This time, the jambalaya tasted just right. Thank you. And for my giveaway, I am giving away an ebook of 3 of my favorite Alandra stories to anybody who'd like a copy.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you, Loren. Our second reader is Hadeer Elsbai. Hadeer Elsbai is an Egyptian-American writer and librarian. Born in New York City, she grew up being shuttled between Queens and Cairo. Hadeer studied history at Hunter College and later earned her master's degree in library science from Queens College, making her a CUNY alum twice over. Hadeer, over to you. And if I mispronounced your name, please correct me.
No, you did great. Thank you. All right. So in the part I'm going to read, one of my main characters, Nahel, is chatting with her soon-to-be husband, Nico, but it is an arranged marriage, so they don't know each other very well. And so as they're chatting, they're getting to know each other a little better, and we, the readers, learn a little bit more about the world. Right. You read a lot, Nahel observed. She had noticed his collection of books at the Baldinodi estates and noted, too, that he usually had a book on him at all times. Nico looked up. I like reading. He paused. Do you read much? Can't say that I do, Nahel said. She did not even read the Vanguard cover to cover. Reading in general, she found to be dull, and rarely could Nahel sit long enough to read at length. She tried to read books on weaving in failed attempts to teach herself more advanced techniques. She didn't want to learn weaving from dusty papers anyway. She wanted a proper instructor, someone who could assess her stances and her technique. You know the curriculum at the academy will involve reading, yes? I know how to read, Nahel raised an eyebrow. I'm not an idiot. Nico blushed. I wasn't implying. He cleared his throat. And what is it you plan to do after you graduate? I can't imagine your family would be happy to see you join the circus. Nahel scoffed. I'm joining the army. Nico blanched. And your parents are all right with that? It doesn't matter what they're all right with anymore, does it? Given I'm a married woman and all. What did her parents expect her to do about her water weaving anyway? Pretend it didn't exist when shocks of her emotions were liable to disturb any liquid in the vicinity? Was Nahel meant to ignore the immense power she held at her fingertips when it was the only power that truly belonged to her? How could she pretend away her weaving when it set her apart and above so many others? How could she simply tuck it away when she could achieve so much power that she might literally turn the tide of battles? It's not just the border skirmishes with Lorak, said Nico seriously. What if we end up at war with Zorana? Then you'd have to fight in actual battles. Then I'll fight in battles, said Nahel. At least I'd be doing something useful. You wouldn't be afraid? Nahel smirked. I'm not afraid of anything. You should be, said Nico grimly. War isn't all glory and honor. It's messy and bloody. Again, I'd like to remind you that I am not an idiot, said Nahel. You don't need to patronize me. I'm not. Nico began to protest, then sighed. Besides, isn't that ambassador here to prevent a war? Asked Nahel. What's his name? Naji something? Naji Uzani. Nico shrugged. That's not a guarantee of anything, though. Zorana's king is volatile, and he's furious about the reopening of the academy. Reports say he's raised taxes twice in the past year, and the revenue's gone directly to the military. Why would he do that if he didn't intend on war? Nahel knew only vaguely of King Hali of Zorana. She recalled reading something in the Vanguard about his draconian policies on weaving. Weavers in Zorana were second-class citizens, and actual weaving was punishable by death. I don't know what he thinks he's going to achieve, said Nahel. It's not as though weavers are going to just disappear. Well, he certainly wants to eradicate them, replied Nico. On some level, I understand his fear, but you understand? Interrupted Nahel. Nico was quiet for a long moment. Do you know much about the Talyani disaster? I know enough. Stories of Edua, the destroyer, had followed Nahel around as a small child on school playgrounds, the cruel taunts of other children indistinguishable from their fear. Edua Bedawi, a prodigy, and strange anomaly, a weaver with control over all four elements, and immensely powerful. Somehow, she had sunk an entire peninsula and nearly all of the people living on it, decisively ending a war between Ramsawa and Talyana that had dragged on for decades. I've read survivors' reports of what happened, said Nico quietly. Weaving at that level, it's terrifying. Volcanic eruptions, sinkholes, waves high enough to block out the sun. What does that have to do with Zorana? Asked Nahel slowly. He looked intently at her. A glare of sunlight glinted off his spectacles. They lost landmass too. And people. Their coastline used to be much closer to the Talyani Peninsula. Nahel shrugged uncomfortably. Edua Bedawi was an exception. She's the only weaver in existence to hold that kind of power. That we know of. You can't punish all weavers because of the actions of a single deranged woman, argued Nahel. That's not what I'm saying, protested Nico. Weavers should be trained and they should be taught to control their abilities, especially when they're so tied to emotional states. If King Hali's goal were to prevent more death, he would see that, but he's only reacting to his fears. I'm merely saying I understand his motivation, and I'm not justifying it. And Edua Bedawi wasn't deranged. She was purposely turned into a weapon of mass destruction. He hesitated. We don't know if she intended to destroy Talyana like she did. Nahel whistled. That's a controversial statement, especially coming from a Talyani. Nahel could easily believe it, though. How often had she lost control over even a small argument? If the rumors about Edawa Bedawi were true, the magnitude of her powers was enormous, practically godlike. What might a temper tantrum of hers look like? Nico quirked his lips. I'm far more of a Ramsawi now. I've never even seen Talyana or what's left of it. I can't speak the language. I know hardly anything about it except what I can glean from history books. Still, you don't hear anyone defending Edawa Bedawi. Nico looked thoughtful. I don't know if I'm defending her, but she's an interesting figure. So much about her is shrouded in mystery. I don't know that we'll ever truly know what she was thinking when she did what she did. They fell into a silence that felt far more companionable than earlier ones, and Nahel tried once again to broach the topic of Nico's mistress. She couldn't help it. She was desperately curious. So, what do you plan to do about your... Nahel scowled. Can you at least tell me her name? No, said Nico shortly. And if anything changes, I assure you that you, as my wife, will be the first to know. With that, Nico hid his face behind his newspaper, and the silence grew tense once more. And that's it. If you like that, please do enter the giveaway. I'll be giving away one hardcover copy to one lucky winner. And thank you.
Our third reader is Kaaron Warren. Multi-award winner Kaaron Warren has published 5 novels and 7 short story collections. She's sold over 200 short stories to publications big and small around the world and has appeared in Ellen Datnow's Year's Best Anthologies. She was guest of honor at World Fantasy, StokerCon, and GenreCon. Kaaron, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So I'm going to be reading from Bitters, a novella that was inspired by the Roman recipe for garum fish sauce and also by the cults of wellness. An hour it took McNubbin to drive to work and the stink of the man with him all the way. What he did was listen to the audiobook of his wife reading History of the Man. She did it for him and no one else. Her love letter to him, her voice all soft and sexy. She made the recordings when they were early together, and still the words brought back to him those hot days when they were fit and young and carefree. He's got all his limbs, this huge metal man, and we know he's a man because he's got that too, stiff and long, halfway down his thigh, semi-erect and always that way. Her voice all breathy. 3 men, arms stretched, could only just touch fingers around one shin. You'd have to stand 60 men tall to reach his head if there weren't the steps winding around. His arms are crossed over his chest as if he is hugging himself, and one finger pokes out, admonishing us all to behave. The metal is copper-coloured, but not copper, some substance long since exhausted, the last of it melted to forge this giant. He's been here well beyond living memory, more than 1,000 years. It took 100 years to build him, section by section, the workmanship so perfect that if you ran your fingers over the joins, you could only feel a slight ridge. The first bodies went in while he was still being polished. The 11th broken girl was so fresh dead, McNubbin could feel the last of her pulse, he thought, could feel the blood flowing, although nothing else was there. He carried her up the 400 steps to the man's mouth, sad for her strength and future, love and all ahead of her, and later said to his workmates, "Where are they coming from, these broken girls?" They all had the required ID, the approvals, the medical proof of drug-free, yet none were local. Locals weren't flawed. These ones had skin blemishes, cloudy eyes. You could tell they hadn't taken bitters all their lives. Who was breaking them? Mostly McNubbin didn't question who he carried up to the man's mouth. The only rule was that they had to carry the bodies to the man within 3 days. Sooner the better, freshest best. It was not their business who was who, not theirs to decide, although carriers were trained to smell the wrong ones, those too long dead or preserved or filled with drugs. They didn't go into the man. People didn't realise how skilled the carriers were. Jarvis, a carrier long ago gone missing, had been a stickler for it. The bodies he rejected. Thing was, he was always right, and when he said no, all of them refused. It wasn't that they didn't sneak some in, but mostly the sneaky ones came from the professors, tweaks to the bitters. The carriers would never put the bitters at risk. Jarvis thought he knew better than the professors, better than their supervisors, Orton, better than the other carriers. He knew how to say no, that's for sure. That was a man barely missed. A loner, no friends, no family. McNubbin did wonder sometimes why he ran off, considering his obsession for the job and nothing else in his life, but each their own and he's not to judge. The 11th broken girl seemed to shift, and he imagined, as he sometimes did with the nice ones, that she was still alive. He imagined carrying her back down and keeping her safe in his small house, making her soup, and she would rub his feet for him with her thin, cold fingers. His wife wouldn't mind. Her fingers were old and tired and well past rubbing. McNubbin started carrying at 14, one of the youngest, and he was proud of that. He felt every step now, 32 years later, but still he climbed steadily. You had to take each step on its own merit. They were well maintained, serviced every single night, but even so, fluids dripped, thick and slippery. You had to watch your footing. A fall could break all your limbs, and had. McNubbin's brother had tripped over and fallen head to the ground. They had to scoop him up in order to carry him back up to the top, and that was McNubbin's job. Much as it still gave him nightmares, it was no one else's place but his to tip his own brother in. No one else's place to tell his widow too, and whisper it over the head of his tiny baby girl, and tell lies to his son, 4 years old, and not so bright.
Mm.
The girl's breasts pressed into his back as he carried her, slung that way, and her thighs under his fingers felt both soft and firm. Step by step, he reached the top. The smell was far worse up there, and you had to be careful because your eyes might tear up and your head spin no matter how used to it you were. It was a chemical thing they'd been told in training. You did not want to be dizzy at the top. His head was the only open part of him, and that hole, right at the top and angled for access, was big enough to take the bodies. His head tilted back at an angle that would hurt a real man, his mouth wide open, no teeth. More than once, fat men had been sliced in two to fit. Children slipped in easy, as if on a fun ride. Women bent more going in, and no one had the answer as to why. Quickly now, no longer enjoying the feel of the woman's body, McNubbin propped her against the metal head, reached over to the knife rack and selected his favourite, a medium-sized blade. He drew it quickly across her jugular, making sure she was dead before tipping her expertly into the mouth hole. It was a nightmare they all shared, the idea of ending up in the man still alive, so this final slash was another job the carriers had to do. Regardless of the cause of death, they slit throats. He heard the broken girl fall, passing through the broad throat, onto the breastbone and thud into the chest area. He waited for a moment, his head tilted sideways, listening for the faint gurgle, the sound of shifting as she sank. He liked to hear it. It meant the job was complete. At the bottom, he nodded at the salter who was ready to make his way up with his big bag. The salt wasn't as heavy as the bodies, and it didn't smell or leak, but the bags were unwieldy and hard to carry. Some salters were women, those women who'd built their muscles to do it. Why not? There weren't many, and there were no women carriers. Squatting at the giant's feet, a toe tapper was at work. Dozens of tiny clear bottles sat beside her on the workbench. McNubbin watched as she turned the tap plugged into his enormous big toe and held a bottle underneath to catch a drop of the dark, brown, viscous liquid that oozed from the tap. It was a beautiful thing. McNubbin reached out to catch the last small drop, which he rubbed on his gums. She tutted, but only in an habitual way. They all took the drop. And I'm going to stop there. But I do have one PDF for giveaway if you would like to find out what happens. So thank you very much.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Kaaron. Our fourth reader is Kristi McManus. Kristi McManus is a registered nurse by trade, an avid reader and enthusiastic book lover all her life. Her debut novel, Our Vengeful Souls, will be released summer 2023 by Cat Books. When she isn't writing, she enjoys photography, art, and napping, which she considers to be a form of cardio. She lives in Toronto with her husband. Go for it, Kristi.
Thank you. So I'm Kristi McManus, and my debut novel, Our Vengeful Souls, was released just last week, June 6th, from Cat Books. It is a young adult villain origin story of the sea witch from The Little Mermaid. The section I'll be reading is of the betrayal that not only set in motion the events of my novel, but is also a possible catalyst for the fairy tale we all know of The Little Mermaid. Where are we going? I glance around the endless open sea. There are no signs of life, no markings to indicate our way as we leave the borders of the kingdom in our wake. When Triton said father wanted us to train again, I expected to be led to the arena. But as he exited the palace, cutting through the gardens and down the narrow streets until we were met with nothing but the sandy ocean floor and sparse black rock, my heart rate began to increase as though by instinct. Triton, I called again, speeding up to match his pace. Where are we going? He doesn't turn as he answers, his golden hair tied back with a long black string. The outskirts. I skid to a stop, glaring at his back, incredulous. The outskirts? Why in the world? He spins on me like a waterspout, eyes blazing. Are you afraid, Soraya? I would think after your heroic display the other evening, nothing would be beyond your skill. My eyes narrow to slits, fists clenching. We're not allowed in the outskirts, I remind him, though I know he's fully aware. Surely, Father? Father wants to test us, he interrupts, the sharp tone of his voice replaced with a soft touch of persuasion. The waters here are dark. They'll challenge our vision. The cold will force us to work through the pain and to control our muscles. Master Bourne was planning to bring us here soon, and Father doesn't want us to be unprepared and embarrass him. Begrudgingly, I realize he's right. The arena is safe. We're monitored closely, facing off against each other in what has become a somewhat predictable outcome. As the chill of the water cuts my body, the darkness straining my keen eyes, I understand the purpose of this exercise. Maybe he isn't testing us, I think silently. Maybe he's testing me. Maybe this is the final step in proving to my father that I am actually worthy. With a single nod, I concede, urging Triton the last few miles of the outskirts. By the time we reach the rocky, violent waters, I can no longer feel my body. The current pulls and pushes, keeping my muscles in constant tension to avoid being washed away. The light from the moon is no longer visible at the steps, obsidian night enveloping me from every angle. If it wasn't for my immortal vision, I would be lost. Once content with our location, Triton turns, tossing me a blade. I catch it easily, turning it over in my hand. It's not one of my own, not one of my favorites, but it'll do. I twist it in a practice swing, listening to the melodic sound of it cutting through the water as Triton readies his own sword. I can see it, too, is not one of his usual choices. A black hilt with a large ruby at the base, the blade is a brilliant steel, deadly and sharp. With a nod, I invite him to strike. He cuts through the water with lightning speed, barely giving me enough time to lift my blade to deflect his attack. The moment we connect, he pulls away, spinning back to me to come again, the sound of our blades colliding in a steady, musical song of precision and lethal force. Soon we fall into our dance. We battle for hours, the impact of our swords and fists the only sound in the sea. I'm panting through the pain, the exertion of the fight, and the effort to keep from being controlled by the current is an ever-present opponent. Pulling back after yet another strike, my lungs screaming for oxygen and muscles struggling to obey my command, I move to raise a hand to pause, but Triton ignores the sign, lashing out without warning, his blade slicing the skin of my upper left arm. I hiss against the sensation, the blade so sharp I don't immediately feel the pain as my blood seeps into the water like red clouds skittering across the sky. I place my right hand on the wound to staunch the bleeding as I shoot Triton a withering glare. You idiot, you drew blood. While I expect him to appear abashed, his sword to drop and his apologies to spill from his mouth, instead I find a broad smile on his lips. His eyes luminous in the darkness. The way he stares at me evaporates my courage. Triton, what? My words die off on the tip of my tongue as the wound burns with such intensity the oxygen is sucked from my lungs. I gasp a breath, pulling my hand away to look at the cut. It continues to bleed, red coloring the water, but there's a distinct blue tinge marking the edges. I furrow my brow, lips parting as I turn back to face my brother. The moment I try to speak, my lungs spasm without control. I have no choice but to release my wound, my hands coming to my throat as I struggle to draw oxygen from the water and into my body. Before I have the chance to register what's happening, a torturous pain cuts down the center of my tail as though a blade were slicing it in two. I look down with wide, frightened eyes, thrashing against the agony, and watch in horror as my tail slowly transforms into two separate limbs. Shooting a frantic look to Triton, I try to scream for help as he moves closer to me, but I cannot find my voice. His lips curl into an ugly sneer, the white light behind his eyes obscuring his face. He still grips his sword in my hand, fists clenched around it tightly. It's a poison, and it didn't come cheap, he explains, eyeing me with a curious tilt of his head. I had to pay double for the usual going rate to have the blade impregnated with a suitable dose, plus a bonus for the vendor's discretion. As he moves to circle behind me, I reach out, grappling to clutch his arm, but he jerks away easily. You're not as cunning as you think, dear sister, and not as cautious as you should be, although this time it's not entirely your fault. It was Ashira I followed yesterday to your little hideaway, not you. You, I will grudgingly admit, are harder to track. Pulling in a breath, my lungs burn as water fills them rather than oxygen. I choke against the sensation, coughing uncontrollably, torn between the pain in my tail and the desperation to breathe. I heard everything, Triton growls, moving back into my eye line to stop right in front of me. That mother wishes for you to ascend, that father is foolishly considering it, all because of one lucky night with magic. His lips curl back into a sneer as his hand shoots out, wrapping around my throat in a crushing grip. I gasp against his hold, nails digging into the skin of his forearm, but he doesn't relent. I will not lose the throne to you, he spits through gritted teeth. I will not allow you to shame this family and to dishonor me. But you are still my sister, and I will not lower myself to killing you. Instead, I came up with the next best thing. With a jerk, he pushes me away harshly, eyes following along my body to my tail, where his wicked grin grows. Tears well in my eyes as I look down to find that my once beautiful, powerful tail has been replaced with human legs. My eyes bulge, spots of light flashing before them as I suddenly realize what he's done to me. He's turned me into a human. So I'll stop there. I will also be doing a giveaway. The winner will get a hardback signed copy of the book as well as some other swag.
Ooh. Boy, you find new things in Ursula. Thank you, Kristi. Our fifth reader is Branwen Oshea. Branwen Oshea writes stories with stardust and magic that explore our potential to change not just individuals, not just as individuals, but as a species. In addition to penning mothers, she's a licensed counselor, yoga teacher, sound healer, nature enthusiast, animal rescuer, and proud mom. Go for it, Branwen.
Hi, everyone. So tonight I'm going to be reading from The Calling, and this excerpt is in Rana's point of view. Rana is a 16-year-old star being, or alien, who lives on Earth in a future ice age. Just a little bit of background. Star beings have two physical states, uncrowned and crowned. They're born uncrowned, and near adulthood, they go through a metamorphosis that is sort of like enlightenment, where they become crowned or called crowned ones. And as this excerpt begins, Rana is on a solo journey to master her skills so that she can become crowned. And she has just been chased into an ice cave by an unknown predator.
Branwen, you're a little bit soft. Could you turn yourself up a bit? Thank you.
All right. Okay. The rising gloom made vision difficult, so she rifled through her pack, trusting her fingers to find her fire kit. Dried meat, twine, dagger, finally 2 soaked logs. She yanked one out of the pack and grabbed her flint, firestone, and tinder pouch. The logs were treated by the crowned for the uncrowned in situations like this. If she could only get a good spark, its special soaking would make it catch quickly and remain ablaze all night. She'd be safe. As she smashed the stones together, Scratching came from the darkness outside the cavern's mouth. Something was coming closer, maybe a stone's throw away from the entrance now. Kalakanya gave me an equal chance at success as death. I must find it. Her grip relaxed on the flint and her hands glided together in a fluid motion. Sparks appeared. She repeated the movement, keeping her hands close to the tinder that rested within the carved log. The log burst into flame. Scooting backward, she dug through her pack for the gripper, two interlocking carved bones that grasped a log like a torch. After scrutinizing the distance between the cave entrance and the burning log, she put the gripper down. The fire's current location would prevent predators from entering her cavern. She glanced at the yawning blackness that made up the back of the cavern. A slight air current brushed her cheek. Where's the air coming from? Her eyes were useless in the darkness, and she wasn't eager to blindly enter the cavern's depth with only her unquestionable shielding abilities and her dagger. She crouched, ready to lunge if necessary. Still holding the dagger, she inhaled deeply to awaken all her senses. She unfurled her awareness and prodded the darkness for a rear wall, but couldn't sense one. Did the cavern curve back out like a ram's horn? That could be a great escape route, or another way in for whatever stalked her. Rana glanced around and pondered her best course of action. The cavern was large enough for her to stand erect, but in the near darkness, the uneven roof was treacherous. The burning log cast everything in flickering yellows and grays. Was it a trick of the light, or did strange lateral lines mark the far wall? She approached the marked wall, careful not to trip on the murky, rutted floor or smash her head on the jagged roof. The lines congregated in series of 4 all over the wall. She traced their depth with her dagger. Horizontal lines, not from melting ice. An icy cold chill ran between her shoulder blades. Claw marks. Oh my oneness, why was I pulled to this cave? Her heart thumped wildly in her chest. She could call a crowned one, but she was supposed to do this alone. From farther back in the darkness came animalistic grunts and whimpers. A vocal timbre that deep required a large body, probably a cave digger. Falling stars, this was beyond her abilities. She needed help. Focusing all her attention inward, she resisted her instinct to fight or flee and called the crowned ones. She'd mastered this in class, but never while in mortal danger. Every time she centered and the energy built up, another growl would make her lose focus. I'm going to die because I can't focus, she thought as she backed closer to the lit log. The crowned ones should have already starbeamed here. She wasn't calling properly. No one had heard her. She was on her own. She knelt, and with trembling hands, she grabbed the extra piece of soaked wood. If she put one log at the back of the cave and kept one in the entrance, then maybe she'd be safe between them until daybreak. Of course, that assumed whatever predator lurked outside lost interest in her by daybreak. 2 fires were her best chance, her only chance. She quickly placed the second piece of wood, filled its opening with tinder, and grabbed her stones. The growling grew closer. At this rate, she'd never get the log lit in time. Her mind raced through possibilities, but they all required skills she lacked and ended with her death. Wait, third ones sense energy. In desperation, she expanded her energy to appear larger and hoped her fake size might give the predator pause. In this enlarged energy state, she struck the flint and firestone together. They sparked, but the log remained unlit. Long claws scraped against the floor. She peered up from the flint. The pale light of the first log reflected off 2 eyes. Her body tensed, but she had nowhere to run or hide. She tried to create a shield, but in her panic only managed a brief spark. The third one snarled. Her heart hammered against her chest as her gaze darted to the small dagger lying between her fate. She abhorred violence. Light the log and neither of us will get hurt, she thought. She continued madly striking the rocks together, but her hands shook too much. Then Balavati's nonstop chattering and Kahali's laughter echoed through her mind, and the world made sense again. Their training mantra flowed through her. Trust, focus, breathe. Everything came into ultra-clear focus, as if time had stopped. The flint seemed to light itself before she noticed her hands moving. The tinder caught fire, lighting the log, and she exhaled slowly, afraid of extinguishing the new flames. Keeping the log aligned between her and the beast's eyes, she snatched the dagger. Could she hurt another being to preserve her own life? She raised her gaze, and the shifting firelight revealed her worst fear, a full-grown, teeth-bared cave digger. Its black lips curled, revealing a muzzle full of dagger-like teeth that reeked of musk and rotten meat. Her log formed a pathetic defense. I'm going to stop there. If you want to know what happens, I'm going to be, for the giveaway, giving away a paperback of The Calling and some swag with it. So, yeah, you can fill that out if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Branwen. Our final reader is Tori Eldridge. Tori Eldridge is the author of the Brazilian dark fantasy Dance Among the Flames and The Ninja's Oath, book 4 in the Lily Wem thriller series, coming September 12th this year. She is an Academy Nickel Fellowship semifinalist, a 5th degree black belt ninja, and a former Broadway and TV performer. Tori's shorter works appear in numerous anthologies, including Weird Tales. Tori, it's yours.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Tori Eldridge. I'm going to read to you from Dance Among the Flames, in which you will meet my protagonist, Serafina Olegario. In the beginning of the book, you meet her as a 16-year-old unwed mother as she introduces her infant to her married politician lover who wants nothing to do with this baby. And as she's leaving this really uncomfortable situation, she is possessed by the goddess Yanza, and this disturbs Serafina. This is part of the Umbanda religion, which is an amalgamation of African Yoruba and Brazilian traditions and Catholicism. And Serafina finds a hard time with this because she was raised Catholic. But this goddess will not leave her alone. So this segment is from chapter 5. Sheets of rain pounded the night like the driving rhythms of the African drums and threatened to rip apart Serafina's family hovel, wash the scraps into Tainheros Inlet and out into the Bay of All Saints. She opened the front door and gazed into the storm. It called to her with promises of power and freedom. Had Isolde spoken the truth? Was the queen of the wind and rain really Serafina's god? She closed her eyes and breathed in the mingled scent of ocean and rain. The goddess's name had sounded familiar. Serafina was certain she had heard it before, although when she tried to recall the memory, it slipped from her mind like the ping of a bell. Was this for the best? Had God taken her memory of Yanza to protect her from temptation? Serafina was not ready to give up the Catholicism of her youth. She needed the sacrament of penance to absolve her sins. And at 26, Serafina had sinned more than most. How would she receive Almighty God's forgiveness if she took heathen gods into her heart? Her faith was not as strong as her mother's. She went along for the ride with her brothers and fathers, said the prayers, crossed her heart, confessed the sins, and hoped God would stop his persecution and finally give her a better life. Her mother prayed for their souls. Serafina held out her hand and watched as the rain washed it clean. Was this how it was with Isolde's religion? Were Umbanda followers able to commune directly with their gods? and have their sins absolved? Did they even believe in sin? And if not, did sin still exist? The Mãe Santos claimed that the spiritual heart of Brazil resided in Africa, and that the people who knew this gathered in the terreiros where they could honor and nourish their African gods. They showered them with devotion so the gods would not abandon them and return to their home across the ocean, never to visit again. They bribed Eshu with gifts and begged and pleaded their case and assured the Orixás of their love. Serafina had listened to all of this and more, but still wasn't ready to believe. Yet when the storm called, she went. Rain pelted her face and tamed her wild hair. Mud splattered up her legs and immediately washed away. Although every muscle in her twitched to run back to the warm, dry house, something stronger pulled Serafina into the storm. A familiar presence shoved against her mind like a bully knocking her from the path. Man, it cried and shoved again. Serafina spun in the rain, prepared to fight as her elusive memory returned. She recognized this presence. It had entered her 10 years ago outside of Enrique's apartment. She had thought it was an angel sent to her by God because it had empowered her to fight off a robber and reclaim her baby. Now she could feel its imperious rage and knew the goddess meant her harm. A battle cry ripped through Serafina's mind, followed by the triumphant laughter. Yanza had taken control. There was nothing Serafina could do but listen to the voices as they floated in on the wind. Serava, here comes Yanza. With her luminous crown, here comes Yanza. With the wind and rain, she travels the forest flying over the hills. Here comes Yanza, queen of the wind and the rain. Epase, epase. The god inside Serafina recognized herself in the words of the followers and rushed to greet them. But the rain and the wind made Serafina heady. She lost her direction, wanting only to dance in the storm. She imagined herself dressed in a tunic and pants fashioned from the hide of a beast she had killed herself. She waved what should have been her horsetail scepter to the sky and dared the lightning to strike her down. Power flowed through her body and electrified every nerve. She was Yanza, and Yanza was her. Together, they sped across Bahia like a flash of light until they reached the great Amazon River. Their flurry disturbed the spirits of the dead. When the Ejuns recognized Yanza, the only Orixá who would dare to confront them, they fled. Serafina threw her arms up into the air and shouted the goddess's victory, but Yanza had left, and Serafina was alone. "Stop fighting me!" a woman yelled and grabbed Serafina by the jaw. Fingers wiped the silt from her face as Carmen peered into her eyes. "Are you? Serafina grabbed her friend. "I don't know. I think so. What am I doing in the mud?" Serafina. Mother sobbed with relief behind her. Her son, Carlinhos, cowered as if Serafina might attack him. "What has happened? What did I do?" Carmen laughed, danced in the rain like a crazy woman, shouted at the thunder. "You make so much racket. Everybody come out to see." But they say, "Oh, it's just crazy Serafina." And they go back into their house. Not stay out in the rain like us, sitting in the mud with you. Carlinhos and her mother huddled together while Carmen pulled Serafina to her feet. "It all seems so real," Serafina said. "We were flying across Bahia and running along the Amazon. We challenged the Ejuns and made them flee." "We who?" Serafina asked. "Me and Yanza." Everybody gasped, but Serafina was too overwhelmed to care. She had raced across Brazil and challenged the spirits of the dead. Had any of this been real? "I don't understand. What's happening to me? Carmen shrugged. I don't either, but I think I know who does. And there you go, a little taste of Dancing on the Flames. I'm going to give away an ebook edition to one USA reader. So sign up for that, and you can learn more about me on my website, torieldridge.com.
What a reading. Thank you, Tori.
Thanks so much.
And thank you so much to everyone who came today.